Let's review the story of Queen Esther. It's a long story, so I won't ask you too many questions, hopefully. But Queen Esther, she was in the land of Babylon, it was in captivity. She and all the Jewish people were there, and King Xerxes was the king. Now, what did King Xerxes want to find? He had actually lost his queen, and so he wanted to find a new one, and he searched for a beautiful woman to be his new queen. Well, God had gifted Esther with beauty, and Mordecai, her uncle, knew that, and so he told Esther what? He said, yeah, why don't you go? Why don't you go? You're my cousin, why don't you go, and why don't you see if you could become queen? And what happened? She became queen. She became queen in the most powerful nation in the world at that time. Well, now something that God made sure that happened was Mordecai overheard what? He overheard what? He overheard that, that there was a plot against the king. And so he shared that with Queen Esther, and Esther took it to the king, and that would show up later in the story. But Mordecai was a good follower, a good leader, a good servant of the king, and it showed. Okay, now, in the meantime, what happened was Haman kind of got this big head. He was a great leader, and the king set him up in charge. And Haman, he loved it when people did what? He loved it when people bowed down to him. But who would not bow down? It was Mordecai. He wouldn't bow down. So what did Haman want to do to Mordecai? Yeah, and not only do that to Mordecai, but to who also? Yeah, to not only Mordecai, but all his people. He really hated them as a culture and as a group. He wanted to get rid of them all. And so he got this idea, and he tricked the king into doing this, and he signed a law, and maybe remember the law couldn't be taken back, and it was going to happen. Wow. Mordecai heard about this, and what did he ask Esther to do? It took a lot of courage to do this. He asked Esther to go talk to the king about it. Remember, she could lose her life if the king didn't welcome her when he went there. So Esther did that. And you remember what her first request was? It wasn't to save her people. What did she ask for first? To have a meal and bring Haman with you. She did that, and then at that meal, she asked the king another question. What was that question? Not to save her people yet, but to have a second meal. So she was setting it all up, using her gift of beauty and hospitality in a way of winning the king over. She was just using all her skills. Well, now Haman, in the meantime, was so mad that he plotted just a great way to shame Mordecai. He built this 75-foot-high gallows. It's just absolutely terrible, just mean and up to no good. And then something ironic happened, where the king, he now had found out and remembered that Mordecai had saved his life by exposing that plot against him. And so he asked Haman, hey, what should I do for somebody who does a great thing for the king? Haman thought he was probably talking about him. Do you remember what he suggested should be done? The guy would get a robe and be ridden around in a horse. Now, who ended up having to lead Mordecai around? It was Haman. Oh, man, the shame. Well, as the story continues to go in the book of Esther, now Esther, the next meal, now what did she bring up? She brought up how Haman had tricked things and the king was so mad. Now what happened to Haman? He was put on that gallows. He was killed that way. And now the king made this decree. Now, he couldn't get rid of his old decree, but what did he decree now? That the Jews could defend themselves. And all this happened not by their own might, Mordecai and Esther might. It was God himself who was guiding it. For what purpose? So that the Jewish people could continue their mission to get the world ready for Jesus. And that's why we rejoice in this story. We see God guides history. He gives people like Esther courage. He helps them get through. It's always all about Jesus, and God is guiding history right now. Thanks for reviewing the story with me. God's blessings to you.